Hey, everybody. Hope you all are having a wonderful weekend. Coming to you a little after 7 p.m. Mountain Time on Sunday evening. And I am just going to share this link in a few different places so some other folks can join us. Just give me a minute or two. Hi, Chaz. Failspace, hello. Hope you're doing all right. Hi, everybody. Chaz, I'm acknowledging you. What happened to my beard? My wife and I have a deal that I will shave from the beginning of December through to Christmas, just because she needs a little uh, relief. And so, yeah, so I'm going to have no beard until after Christmas. And this December, we were traveling for the first couple of days of December. And then I went to Vancouver to take my 12-year-old daughter to see the Eras tour. So I did not shave until I came back a little later. So I had the beard a little deeper in December this year than normally. So that is what is going on. Mark or Chaz, Dan, are you offering signed copies of the new book? So the new book is The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. This is an advanced reader's edition. This comes out on April 29th, 2025. And yes, I am going to be working with a local bookstore to sign like a pallet of books. And then evidently I'm also going to be, I don't remember what they call them, but I'm going to be signing like stickers that can be sent out to people who can slap them into the front of their books. So there are a variety of different ways this is happening. And so yes, there will be signed versions of my book available. And I just spoke with, I have a cousin who runs an independent bookseller just outside of, in a town called Clarkdale, which is just outside of Jerome, Arizona. And Jerome is near Sedona, Arizona. I used to spend a lot of time in Jerome with my extended family, but I asked if she would be willing to, she would be open to the idea of me doing a book signing event at her bookstore there in Clarkdale. And she's very excited about that. So I am actually going to be doing some signing events a few different places around the country. We're going to have more information on that in a couple of months. But what kind of relief? Mainly the tickling and the chafing around the facial area and other areas. So yeah, that kind of relief. Oh, that's right. I was going to share this link in a couple other places. Excuse me just a second. Boink. Okay. We should be ready to go. Okay. I have a question. Who were the books of the Bible written for and why? What prompted these people to write it down? Who was supposed to read it when and with what purpose? It depends on the book. There are some books in there that are political propaganda that were written by elites and were only consumed by the literary elites that were mainly intended to try to structure political power. There were books written by prophetic folks. There were independent prophets. There were prophets for hire. There were court prophets that wrote some texts. There were some books that were wisdom literature. They were for circulation, again, among the literate elite mainly, but they were intended to advocate for certain ideologies regarding wisdom and how to live your life and things like that. So for the most part, they were meant for the elites, and they served a lot of different purposes. A lot of the prophetic literature was intended to criticize the elite, for instance, whereas a lot of the historical books were intended to structure power in favor of the elites or certain political groups and movements or priesthoods or cultic centers over and against others. So a lot of different things going on. Once we get to the New Testament, Robin Faith Walsh has a book out called sorry, my I'm hearing my wife yell at one of the dogs. In the New Testament, Robin Faith Walsh has a book out called The Origins of the New Testament and Early Christian Literature that talks about how the Gospels primarily served literary functions among the literate elite, not necessarily intended for consumption by specific communities, but that's how it would end up being consumed. So a lot of different things going on in the texts. Thoughts on the drones? People have overactive imaginations and a lot of conspiratorial mindsets. Dr. Maklelan, what is your opinion on the L represented in Genesis 2, 4 through 24? I think it's Elohim, isn't it? Let me just pull that up real quick. Yeah, I see Elohim. I don't know that L pops up. In fact, let me look and see when the first occurrence of the word L happens. And not until Genesis 12, so it's after the primeval history. So Genesis 1 through 11 does not use the divine name El, it's just Elohim. But in Genesis 2, it is primarily Adonai Elohim throughout the narration, but the reported speech, the dialogue among the characters is only Elohim, which some people suggest is indicative of the author who introduces Adonai borrowing the dialogue from earlier traditions where Adonai was not identified with God. So there's an argument to make there. That's not determinative, but it's certainly something that I think is interesting and is suggestive of what might be going on behind the scenes. As someone, Elijah asks, as someone fascinated in the ANE, is doing graduate work in it a bad idea? What are good routes to go down for that? Graduate work is expensive. It's probably going to require you relocate unless you're planning on going through and doing a PhD. There are not a lot of avenues for using that apart from just, acquiring all of that knowledge. I have been very fortunate to be able to make a living doing public scholarship on social media. There are the overwhelming majority of folks who try to do that do not succeed. Just like the overwhelming majority of folks who set out to get a PhD so they can get a tenure track position teaching at a university somewhere do not succeed. So if you want to do it because those are skills that you would like to have and it's worth the cost to you, go ahead. If you want to do it because you cannot imagine yourself doing anything else and you are happy to scratch and claw to try to make it work, go ahead. But otherwise, I would say it's probably going to cause more problems than it solves. RK, thank you so much for the question. And that just reminds me that I got to have my Discord open because, yeah, live stream. There we go. Diet Dr. Pepper sighting, always. That's my poison. Hi, Dan. Do the modern Samaritans preserve religion/culture from the pre-Assyrian conquest kingdom of Israel, or did they develop after? Love your work. Thank you so much for the kind words. They developed after. No, they do not preserve anything from the pre-Assyrian conquest kingdom of Israel because they do not date to that early. They are post-exilic in origin. Simone says, hi, Dan. I'm in the process of working out what I want to focus on for my MA, so working through various methodological questions. Where do you sit RE, sociological/anthropological models for religion? Does it describe something socially real? Are there social facts and so on? Or are you more of a constructivist? I ask because CogSci tends to lean realist, but you talk about constructiveness, RE identity, meaning making, etc. I suppose that's also a question about naturalism. Yes, cognitive science of religion tends to lean into the notion that religion is something out there that can be identified. And Franek. Oh, I'm gonna miss. There's a scholar. I'm pretty sure his last name is Franek. Yes. Juraj or Jure. I don't know exactly how to pronounce this scholar's last name, but published an article, for instance. Hang on just a moment. I think that should be the right one. Okay, hang on. I'm using Firefox because on Chrome, for whatever reason, StreamYard doesn't let you change your microphone, and I'm trying to share the screen, but it is being a jerk. So no, it won't let me share my screen. Dang it. Oh, there it is. Open system settings. Firefox. Okay. Give me just a second. Okay, this may or may not work. I'm sorry for taking so long on this question. Sorry for leaving some of these things up here. Okay, hey, it worked. Okay, so this is an example of this. Has the cognitive science of religion redefined religion? And this scholar goes through and argues that we can define religion, and religion is something out there in the world. And I would say this is representative of probably the majority view among cognitive scientists of religion, but I have been critical of it within the broader study of religion, as well as within cognitive linguistics. The majority view is that conceptual categories like religion are discursive in origin. And for this reason, I advocate for a discursive approach, which would be one advocated, for instance, by Koku van Stuckrad. So this paper, Discursive Study of Religion Approaches, Definitions, Implications, does, I think, a very good job of talking about how religion is discursive. And if we want to try to define it, we must define it discursively. And so the definition that he comes up with is, oh, I always lose the place. I don't remember exactly where it is. It's at the top of the page. I remember that. I don't know where it's. Basically, he defines it as religion is whatever a social group determines or decides religion is. And I think that's a much more accurate way to go about it. On my Linktree, there's all of my academic publications are freely available on my Linktree. And one of the things that is up there is, I think it's called Draft Religion or something like that. It was a chapter from my dissertation that I ended up cutting out, but discusses the development of the concept of religion in quite a bit of detail. And explains, and I talk about the cognitive science of religion. I talk about cognitive linguistics. I talk about the broader study of religion. I talk about all that. I critique Franek and explain where I think the concept is coming from. Did you lose the beard because you were drafted by the Yankees? No, many years too late to even try that. Do you have a favorite Christmas movie? Christmas Vacation is my favorite Christmas movie. Shamgar Zoxcode says, hey, Dan, appreciate your work. Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. Your recent video tackling someone taking AI's word for the origin of Christmas was interesting and got me wondering if you'd consider looking into a sort of academic biblical AI model for the common person to use, a sort of AI trained on scholarly works and the scholarly consensus that could be asked any question and then utilized just as other AIs are. I think that would be interesting. The biggest obstacle to this is something that is a bit of a controversy right now among scholars, where there are publishers who are turning over journal articles and books, digital versions of them, to AI companies, even though the authors have not given any approval and are not getting a dime for it. So there would be an enormous problem with accessing all of the scholarly literature that is out there without the authors, the originators of those arguments and those ideas and those data, seeing any compensation for it. Training an AI model would require an awful lot of access. That's money would all go to publishers, and a lot of scholars, and I think rightly, are upset about that. So I don't see that on the horizon anytime soon. With public access stuff, I think it would be a little more ethical to do something like that. However, that's not going to be broadly representative of the field. So, although, if we had, and this is something that I'm thinking about, if there's a way to do this, to begin to publish basically intros to certain research questions that give you the state of the field, and they would be public access or freely available type of stuff that would credit the scholars who are responsible for this kind of stuff, but would just summarize. And that might be a way to go about doing that, but that's something that's a bit off in the future. Hand of Omega, thank you so much for the question. If animals were currency in the OT, a man tries to pay a prostitute with a goat, what were their relative values? That would be relative. That would be up to the people to determine. It was a little closer to a barter system where in certain situations there would be standardized values. A slave, for instance, had a standardized value. But on the, for local interactions, it would be whatever they agreed on. 2 lambs equal a sheep, and did they really sacrifice as many bulls as the Torah commands? Almost certainly no. They probably didn't sacrifice as many as is in the text. Those are aspirational, ideological, propagandistic, literary creations for the most part. Company of Quail, thank you so much for the super chat question. Would you mind to discuss Jesus's relationship to Judaism and the Old Testament in general? Is there any data that supports Christians should be following or caring about the Old Testament, or should they only follow Jesus? So at least the Gospel of Matthew seems to suggest that they should be following all the laws of the Hebrew Bible. So those were the author of Matthew seems to be a Judaizer, seems to suggest that. But Christianity pivoted into the Gentile world rather quickly. And so we had Paul and others advocate pretty quickly as well for not obeying a lot of the laws from the law of Moses. So Jesus's message, we don't know for sure exactly what Jesus would have thought about this. I am of the opinion that it's probably more likely than not Jesus was not trying to start a new religion, but was more like a Martin Luther, just trying to advocate for a specific stream of tradition within Judaism. And later that got taken up by other authors who were going in different directions, but we can't really know for sure. So yeah, what Christians should be doing, that's a question for Christians. That's a theological question. That's not a question that can really be answered based on the historical data. But yeah, certainly one that was very, very important to the earliest Christians and still important today for a lot of folks. Simone says socialization of knowledge, i.e. guaranteeing it is an available public good, also requires the socialization of the production of knowledge and making the production of knowledge socially secure and the fruits of the labor of knowledge production fairly compensated. I think that's a fundamental imbalance in the current state of AI. I would agree. I think there are a lot of competing interests going on here. I think it would be something that could be phenomenally helpful with the right guardrails and everything like that. But yeah, with this industry being so weak, not poorly represented. There are plenty of people who have expertise in this, but it's a very, very difficult discipline in which to make a living and to appropriate people's intellectual property, compensating publishers and not the actual originators of the intellectual property is an issue. But yeah, there's still a lot of there's a long way to go discussing that kind of stuff. Chief Dixon, thank you so much for the question. Dan, I purchased the new annotated Book of Mormon you recommended, and after reading the essay in the back, I am wondering, is it written as a scholar or apologist? So Grant Hardy is the editor. I think that's probably the author of the essay you're talking about. I don't know. There might be multiple essays in the back. But Grant Hardy is a believing Latter-day Saint, and so he's trying to strike a balance to the best of his ability between making this accessible for a non-LDS critical, more scholarly oriented audience and believers in the Book of Mormon. And so it's not as critical as I would be, but I think it still does about as good a job that can be done on this kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't think it's apologetic, but it is definitely coming from a believing perspective, even though Grant tries very hard to represent as scholarly a take as possible, without denying his believing status or positionality. Oh, whoops, sorry. And Beeson, thank you so much for the question. Are you supporting fragmentary or supplementary? I would say I'm probably a little closer to supplementary, but I am not really an advocate for an identity like that. I, one, don't want to be nailed down to these ideas, and two, I don't want all of the baggage that comes with an identity like that. I kind of am more of an a la carte theorist in that regard. So that's why I don't really say this is my theory. I wouldn't advocate for any of the theories over and against all others. But that may change in the future. I haven't been focusing a lot in my research on Pentateuchal composition, and so if I drill down to the bedrock of that, I might have stronger feelings. Hi, Dan. In Genesis 1, what does it mean for humans to be made in our image? I recall from your video, God is speaking to the divine council, but does image refer to something physical? Yes, that is the consensus view, is that fundamentally this refers to physical outward appearance. And there's an argument to make, and if you'll give me just 1 second, I will grab this book. No, not that book. These two books. Okay. So part of this has to do with divine images and humanity being created as a type of divine image, because what a divine image does is it manifests the power, authority, the presence of the deity wherever it needs to be. And so a lot of scholars, myself included, think that at least a part of this is about suggesting that, suggesting that humans don't worship divine images because humans are divine images, which is why in Genesis 2, the creation of Adam very much follows the pattern for the creation of divine images in ancient West Asia. And so I talk about that a bit in, oh gosh, it's either chapter 2 or 3 of my book. The book has a different arrangement from the dissertation, so I forget. Chapter 2, Encountering Divine Agency. So that's about divine images. And I talk about the fact that in the Hebrew Bible, humans seem to be represented that way. Stephen Herring, who was my Hebrew instructor at Oxford, published Divine Substitution, Humanity as the Manifestation of Deity in the Hebrew Bible and the Ancient Near East, which talks a lot about the same theory. And then we also have Catherine McDowell. Her Harvard dissertation was published as The Image of God in the Garden of Eden. The creation of humankind in Genesis 2:5 through 3:24 in light of Mizpi, Pitpi, and Wipatur rituals in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, which is basically talking about how the rituals that enlivened divine images seem to be the pattern, the template for the creation of humanity in Genesis 2, at least. And so I think in Genesis 1, the image of God thing is very similar. Shamgar's Oxcode says, based on what you said regarding publishing, what changes would you like to see in publishing for scholarly works? I would like to see scholarly works be more open access, publicly available, as long as there's some kind of mechanism in place for ensuring fair compensation for the scholars involved. And I think they need to have more agency in the publishing process. Right now, if somebody wants to publish a book open access, it's not true of the Society of Biblical Literature's open access series, Ancient Near East Monographs, which also has Spanish texts. So the series is also called Monografías sobre el Antiguo Cercano Oriente. So you can find free PDFs in that series. They don't charge, but for most journals and books, most publishers, if you want to do it open access, they will charge you thousands of dollars because they want to get compensated for publishing. But authors of like journal articles are not compensated. Right now, you publish journal articles in order to advance your career and get tenure and things like that. So it's cachet with the administration of the university that you're working at. It's not necessarily there's no kind of direct compensation. So the way that scholarship funds itself and the way that people make money doing scholarship fundamentally needs to change. Thank you so much, Mike. I love your method of argument and bringing to light the creation of religion as a human evolutionary technique. Where can one learn to develop and dissect arguments as easily and logically as you do? Graduate school, several degrees, a lot of practice arguing on the internet with people about the Bible and religion. I don't know. There are some books on logic and critical thinking and stuff like that. I don't know that any of them have been hugely influential on me beyond just little individual questions I might have here and there. But I would say that probably the thing that influenced me the most was just paying attention to the structure and the methods and the theories that informed the arguments that I saw being made by the scholars that I most respected in the literature that I was reading, mostly journal articles, but also in academic books. In trade books, it's not so much about trying to convince colleagues. So the argumentation is not as strict and usually not as robust. So academic books and journals are where I learned how to put together arguments. And I think for me, the reason that I am told that I am able to kind of pre-digest some of this stuff and make it and communicate it in a more accessible manner to the public. And I am always flattered when I hear that because I have always struggled with understanding a lot of academic argumentation. So for me, that was how I understood stuff, is I had to break it down into constituent elements and look at the structure of the argument and the logic and all that and try to figure out how to make sense of it for me. And so when I communicate it to others, it's really, this is how I was able to make it make sense for me. But fortunately, that seems to the way it makes sense to me seems to resonate with an awful lot of folks out there. So I don't know that that's something that can be taught, particularly not in books that I'm aware of. Shamgar's Oxcode says, if your academic communication career hadn't taken off as it has, what would you be doing for work now? Would you be doing translations, teaching, research? I would probably still be a scripture translation supervisor for the LDS Church, which didn't suck, like was an incredible job. That was my first salaried, full-time, benefited position that I had ever held at any point in my life, and was a phenomenal job. And I got to travel all around the world, meet people from all kinds of different countries, speaking all kinds of different languages, many places I didn't even know existed before, which is great for Jeopardy because whenever it's about geography on Jeopardy, there's like a 75% chance that the answer is going to be a place that most people have never heard of and are probably not going to pronounce correctly. Might be a place that I've been. So that was an incredible job. I would not be sad at all if I were still doing that. But yeah, I would probably still be doing that. Eric, thank you so much for the question. Hi, Dan. Can you recommend any academic books about early Christianity history? Dermot McCullough's book, gosh, I think it's called History of Christianity, the First 3,000 Years, which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek title. Let me verify that that's the title. A History of Christianity, the First 3,000 Years by Dermot McCullough. That and actually I can probably show you the. That's not the cover. That's some silly Penguin Books cover. That's a really, really good one. I think it's a very detailed discussion. I think it's very helpful. I have other histories of Christianity that I have looked at, that I have sometimes recommended. Let me just pull some examples up. They're the multi-volume Cambridge History of Early Christianity. Those have been being published for about the last 20 years. There's Freeman, published with Yale University Press, A New History of Early Christianity. That's not a very long book, but I think asks and answers some very interesting questions. And then let me just make sure this is a book and not an article. Yeah, Marcus Vincent with King's College in London, published with Cambridge University Press, Writing the History of Early Christianity from Reception to Retrospection, which is kind of looks at how folks have written the history of early Christianity, beginning with the early Christians themselves writing their history. So that's an interesting book as well. And then also, what is the academic consensus about the 4 kings and 4 kingdoms in Genesis 14? That they are fiction. In fact, I think one of the king's name is his name is not, or his name is lost, or something like that. I don't remember all of their names, but King Amraphel of Shinar, King Arya, King Chedorlaomer, and King Tidal. That's not the one. Oh, then they've got a bunch of other kings. Yeah, Shemeber, name is lost. So those are probably fuzzy, archaic memories. They might be legends. They might be associated with specific kings. Shinar, I think, was the name of was a name for Babylonia, so that might be somewhat historical. At least it's the name of an actual territory. I think we see that in Genesis 10 or 11. I think it's in 11. So, but we don't have a ton of information about that. Have you seen the movie Heretic? I have not. I have heard an awful lot about it. I have been told that I need to see it, but I have not had a ton of time for watching movies, particularly in theaters and things like that. Much love from Argentina. Che, gracias, vos. I need to go back to Argentina. I need some. Well, see, I lived in Uruguay, so I call them bizcochos, but in Argentina, I think they call them facturas. But I need a good dulce de membrillo, bizcocho, or dulce de leche. Oh, I need some of the. Man, they had really good steak and burgers down there too. Thank you so much, my friend, for the question. What are the annals of the kings of Israel and Judah, as mentioned in the book of Samuel and Kings? Were the annals real texts or just inventions of the authors? Probably real texts. Probably the sources for what they were writing, the histories they were writing. Is there any possibility of finding any portion of those? I mean, it's possible. It's phenomenally unlikely, but maybe we end up digging up one of these texts at some point. If they were written on something like papyrus or something like that, the odds are are slim to none. If they were written, if any version of it was scratched into pottery at some point or written in stone or something like that, or buried deep underground, maybe it's preserved. I'm always looking forward to what discoveries are going to be made in the future. The big time ones with texts are few and far between, but they do happen. So it's a possibility, but I think it's phenomenally unlikely to happen. Hand of Omega, thank you so much. Can you please respond to Footnotes video? Did John Darby invent the rapture? Which cites lots of sources that seem to suggest that he did not. I have seen some things. Hang on just a second. Footnotes, is that on? I assume that's on YouTube. I have seen something on this. Okay. Who is this individual? The arguments that I've seen are usually about like the word rapture and the concept of being snatched away or something like that. I'll have to look into that and see if the argument is any good, but it's still the consensus view that Darby was the primary popularizer and articulator of the rapture as it is widely understood today, even though he may not have been the original creator of all the constituent elements of it. Travis, thank you so much for the question. Is there a linguistic way around the obviously unfair treatment of Adam and Eve for being punished for doing something they couldn't have known was wrong since they hadn't eaten of the fruit yet? All I would point out is that this is a literary creation. This did not actually happen, so there were not actual people who suffered these actual consequences. This is an Aesop's tale about how humanity got to be the way it is, why snakes don't have legs, why people hate snakes. It's more an etiology for the way humans are and the relationships between men and women and that kind of stuff than it is an actual tale of any actual people's actual struggles. So when people write stories like that, they're going to, their characters are going to suffer whatever they're going to suffer to get the point across. And so I don't think from a linguistic point of view, we need to try to go in and salvage the justice of God or anything like that. It's just a story. But yeah, the punishments don't really seem to have much to do with the crime. And the way Christians are the ones who have innovated this notion, who've tried to historicize it and tried to speculate about what Adam and Eve did and didn't know, and mortality before and after the fall and all this kind of stuff. But the fall is not a thing within Judaism. And so it's a particularly Christian question born of particularly Christian traditions. Shamgar's Oxgoat asks, have you seen Dr. Sledge's recent video on Baal? I don't believe I have. Let me pull up Esoterica and see. I told him I'd love to come back on the show at some point or have him on the Data Over Dogma podcast at some point. 2 days ago. Who is Baal? How a storm deity fought sea, death, and Adonai only to become a demon. Sounds like it's going to... I'm probably going to agree with the majority of it. Let me see who he cites. Smith and Coogan, Stories from Ancient Canaan, Day, Adonai and the Gods and Goddesses of Canaan, Cross, Canaanite Myth and Hebrew Epic. Emmanuel of Ugaritic. The only thing I would say, if those are really the main sources, I would say those are a bit outdated. Ayali Darshan's book, and I'm forgetting the full title. Let me pull that up. So this is not specifically about Baal, but this is has an awful lot to do with the idea of fighting the sea and everything like that. So The Storm God and the Sea from 2020 is a wonderful book that talks about that conflict myth and how it is found, or where it's found in Egyptian and Hurro-Hittite literature, in Ugaritic literature, in Babylonian literature, and then in the Bible. So that's, I think, the best available discussion about the combat myth right now. Um, I think Ted Lewis's book, The Origin and Character of God, is going to discuss the different divine profiles of Adonai, and is going to talk a bit about Baal, not a ton. There's another book by Green called The Storm God in the Ancient Near East that talks about Adonai as well as Baal. The Baal cycle by Smith is going to be one of the better things, better discussions about Baal. Baal as warrior king in the Baal cycle. That's a chapter by Mark Smith. That's from 2020. Hang on just a second. What is this? Oh, there's a Festschrift from Mark Smith called Mighty Baal. That is a Festschrift that's just a fancy German word for a collection of essays that are published in honor of a specific scholar. But there are, it looks like 6 articles all about Baal as a part of it. No, it looks like all the articles are about Baal. Part 1 is Baal's story. Part 2 is Baal's peers. So that'll be about Adonai. Daniel Fleming, a wonderful scholar, his article is entitled Adonai Among the Baals, Israel and the Storm Gods. So that's from 2022? No, 2020. So that would be worth... There's probably some more up-to-date stuff in there, and I'll just share. This isn't the cover, but this is the title page for that book. But yeah, I'm certain that will have a lot of great information, but it's probably not the most up-to-date discussion there could be. Happy Sky, thank you for the question. Any book recs for If Jesus Rose from the Dead? I think the best historical discussion is Dale Allison's book. So I would recommend that. Let me just pull that up real quick so you can see that. I would not recommend the Resurrection book by Habermas. That's going to be an apologetic book. But Dale Allison in 2021 published The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, History, which I think is a wonderful discussion of the data and where they stand. But thank you for a great question. MD, hey, Dr. Maklelan. Hey, MD, love your channel. Keep being awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Hand of Omega, what exactly is Yule and how does it affect Xmas? And did England once ban Xmas? The U.S., well, not the country of the U.S., but Christians who traveled over the U.S. once banned Christmas. It wouldn't surprise me if England at some point tried to ban it. Yule is a non-Christian European tradition that probably influenced the way Christians in Europe celebrated Christmas. And if there is people who live and have traveled to many different parts of the world realize that people celebrate Christmas in a lot of different ways in different parts of the world. It's not all Christmas trees and wreaths and Christmas caroling and presents. It's fireworks in some parts of the world. It's where like that's the main thing. It is KFC and cake in some parts of the world. It's celebrated in so many different ways. But Yule, I'm sure there are parts of Europe where Yule has had a lot more influence on the way Christians celebrate Christmas. But I think the wreath is probably the main influence that can be seen in the way Americans stereotypically celebrate Christmas. But it has nothing to do with the Christmas tree. The Yule log may or may not. I think there have been some good arguments that the Yule log was not a part of the pagan celebration of Yule, or at least was not borrowed by Christians, but I haven't seen the most up-to-date discussions on that. But you can, and I think, don't remember exactly what Yule originally was a celebration of. It was obviously a winter festival. Okay, so Germanic peoples, and these days, there are a lot of neo-pagans that celebrate Yule today, and most neo-pagans are not actually celebrating things because they have accurately preserved how these things were celebrated anciently. They're reconstructing things, and some of those reconstructions are based on a lot of speculation and assumptions about how things were done anciently. So it sounds like scholars connected to the wild hunt, which is the thing that Odin did on his flying eight-legged horse and stuff like that. The term Yule and cognates are still used in English and the Scandinavian languages, as well as in Finnish and Estonian, to describe Christmas and other festivals occurring during the winter holiday season. I am going to mispronounce that name, so I apologize, Zoxir. Are you interested, but thank you for the question, are you interested in doing a series about the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price? I've done some videos on the Book of Mormon. I don't really do series much, just because I don't have the time to plan and organize all that. I will certainly do books about the book, I will certainly do videos about the Book of Mormon in the future. I occasionally do something about the Pearl of Great Price. I might have to do just a little background on the Pearl of Great Price or something. That might be something interesting. Joshua, thank you so much for the question. A Christian church that is the most Christian? I don't think that's something that can be quantified, because there's very little that the way scholars reconstruct the earliest generations of Christians, there's very little that matches up with that, or that even could match up with that. And there's a lot we don't know. So I think, I don't think you can really quantify that. It wouldn't be linear anyway. There'd be so many different dimensions you'd have to look at. But yeah, I don't think that question has an accurate answer. If it does, I'm certainly not qualified to answer it. Shamgar's Oxcode, are you learning anything new now, like a new language or a side hobby? I have intentions to learn lots of new things. I would love for my Akkadian to get better, and for my Syriac to get a lot better. I keep intending to do that. I'd love for my modern Hebrew and my modern Greek to get a lot better as well. Side hobby, I started teaching my 12-year-old daughter how to snowboard a while ago, and I haven't snowboarded for 25 years, so I'm having to relearn that hobby. Yeah, not too much. My wife keeps threatening to sign me up for ballroom dancing classes because she's a dancer and a dance teacher, and enjoys ballroom dancing, but she has not carried through on that threat yet. So we shall see about that. But that will be on the list at some point, I'm sure. Carl J says, I believe Christmas was banned during the time of Cromwell, 1647. Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, the 1660 was a big year for for England and perhaps for Christmas. All right, let's see how we go. So LDS is not the most Christian then? No, it's not any more Christian than any other Christians. I think there are some things that the LDS Church has reconstructs that I think strike chords with certain things that were abandoned long ago by Christianity, but not in any kind of supernatural way. And there are a lot of traditions that do that in one way, shape, or form. Your Syriac will get better quickly. All you have to do is apply a little Billy Carson twice a day. I always I was raised with the rule that Billy Carson a day keeps the Syriac away. So that would be a way to not get better at Syriac. But Thaddeus61, thank you so much for the question. Presupposing biblical characters are real, even the ones that probably aren't, which one would you most like to meet? Very few of them I would be interested in personally. I think most of them were awful people. But I would love to see what the historical David was like. I think that there was a historical David, and I would love to know what relation that historical David has to the reconstructions that have been executed of what he was like. Dr. Tony Heiser, thank you so much for the question. In Matthew 12:26 through 27, is Jesus equating Satan to Baal? What's the relationship between the two here? I think you're talking about the house divided against itself cannot stand. How can Beelzebub, or how can demons cast out demons by the prince of demons, or something like that, where it refers to Beelzebul, which in some translations is written Beelzebub, which is inaccurate. The Greek is Baal-Zevul, which is a more accurate version of the title Zevul Baal, which means Prince Baal or Prince Lord, which we know from Ugaritic literature. But in the Hebrew Bible, it's editorialized as Beelzebub, which would mean Lord of Flies. And it seems to be suggesting that, but folks like Archie Wright in his book, oh shoot, The Origin of Satan. Hang on just a second. Satan and the Problem of Evil by Archie Wright. That's a really good discussion of the origin of, and he wrote an earlier book called The Origin of Evil Spirits. But this is a more recent book all about Satan and malevolent deities and things like that. He argues that Beelzebul is kind of one of the chief angels of Satan, but is not equated with Satan. So I think there are arguments for both sides of that. I tend to think it certainly seems like it, but maybe that's not the case. Shamgar's Oxcode says, building off of the who would you want to meet, which biblical character you think you could take in a fight? Well, it depends on what kind of fight we're talking about, because they probably had a lot more experience than I do with swordplay, and bows and arrows and things like that. So I probably wouldn't stand a chance against somebody like Deborah. But I think I could probably take an awful lot of the other characters if it was just bare knuckles. But that would be a weird thing to see. Conversely, are there any biblical villains who aren't that bad upon further examination? Nero comes to mind, though ancient Roman emperors being what they are, I wouldn't trust him blindly. Yeah, folks like Jezebel and folks like that probably, and several of the kings were probably not remotely as bad as they're made out to be in the text, because they're vilified for propagandistic purposes. Tetragrammaton question: are both H's silent in most reconstructions? Is it common for a Hebrew hey to be silent in the middle of a word? It is normally, if a hey is in the middle of the word and it has a silent schwa under it, it's more likely to be silent in the way that it's reconstructed these days by scholars. But that's pretty rare. Normally, the hey is going to have some kind of vowel underneath it, in which case it's functioning as a consonant, and you're going to pronounce it. But the hey on the end may be an absolutive case ending, in which case it may just be a mater lectionis for a long A quality vowel. But that depends on how one reconstructs the etymology of the name. Mike, thank you so much for another question. What time frame in the history of the Bible was the first mention of Christ as a savior? Also, is there historical context on the Good Samaritan story? There's no historical context on that. That's the only place where that story is told, and it's told explicitly as a parable, so a fictional story. What timeline in the history of the Bible was the first mention of Christ as a savior? Well, that would be the writings of Paul, which would probably date to First Thessalonians is usually agreed to by scholars to be the earliest of the surviving letters of Paul, maybe late 30s, maybe early 40s CE is when that was written. So well before the Gospels, but that would be the first place that anybody refers to Christ at all, much less as a savior. But the savior ideology for the Messiah in early Judaism was probably more directly associated with political deliverance than with spiritual salvation. In fact, there's a case to make that the pivot from social political deliverance to spiritual salvation was forced upon Christians after Jesus was crucified, and they had to come up with a way to renegotiate the identity and mission of the itinerant preacher that they were following around. There's a case to make that that's what happened. But thank you for the question. Is Christophany taken seriously for scholars? Thank you for the question, Dracopoli. If you mean, is it taken seriously in the sense that scholars think it really happened? Not most scholars, no. If you mean in the sense that if you're talking about the idea that the early appearances of God in the Hebrew Bible were Jesus, that is a Christian reinterpretation of those passages. So it sounds like the answer might be no, unless I'm misunderstanding what you mean by Christophany taken seriously by scholars. If you want to clarify there, that could be helpful if I have not answered your question. Claude Simeon, thank you so much for the question. Why not historical Abraham and Moses with a created mythology verse non-existent? No outside ex ref, too long between event / written history versus historical David. We do have archaeological data that is suggestive of some kind of David who started a dynasty, probably in the 10th century BCE, and that would be the Tel Dan stele, which dates to probably the middle of the 9th century BCE and refers to kings that the Aramean Hazael killed who were part of the House of David or the Davidic dynasty. So we do have that. And David is kind of where we begin to shift from overwhelmingly not historical accounts of early Israel's history to more historical, at least in the broad strokes, regarding who was in charge of Israel and the other nations and things like that. When it comes to Abraham and Moses, the stories are very clearly many centuries separated from when they were written down, and the stories are told in ways that indicate they were composed many centuries after their setting. So, for instance, Abraham is engaging with Philistines. The Philistines did not exist until around the 12th century BCE. That's like 800 years after Abraham was supposed to have lived. So we just don't have a reason to reconstruct a historical Abraham or Moses. That's not to say that there's no way there could have been some kind of historical kernel in there, but if there was, we have no idea what kind of relationship that historical kernel has to the way these stories were passed down. But if there is any such relationship, it's certainly a very tenuous one, because we can account for pretty much all the details with other data that place the development of the story centuries later. So it just becomes less and less likely that these figures were actually historical. But there are scholars who argue that there was a historical Moses, or at least that the story preserves remnants of an actual historical event. Baxter, thank you so much for the question. What acts does porneia in Matthew refer to? That depends on what Matthew thought were inappropriate sexual activities, because the word fundamentally referred to adultery and to sex work. That was 80 to 90% of what somebody was referring to when they used the word porneia. But it expanded to include any other sexual activity that was considered inappropriate by a given social group. And so there was no list. It's not like it could refer to these 7 things and no other things. It could be used to refer to anything that a particular group considered to be inappropriate sexual activity. And we don't know for sure unless we have some kind of explanation by that particular social group what it referred to. For folks like Paul, Paul was a celibate man who was operating from a particular Greek philosophical perspective on sexuality that viewed sexuality as one of the baser urges of the flesh, and so thought that one was better off overcoming those urges. And so for Paul, pretty much any kind of expression of sexual desire or any kind of sexual activity outside of just occasional prophylactic sex in order to keep down the urges between a married man and a married woman was probably considered porneia. But for Matthew, it was probably close to that, but we don't know for sure. I don't think we can say it included all these things. The Kalich, thank you so much for the question. Can you make podcasts with mistranslations in the Greek New Testament, like Isaiah 7:14 and Matthew, or the born again verses, born from above with Nicodemus? We've done a couple of those. We just did one recently where we talked about Acts 15 verses 16 and 17 as riffing on the Greek Septuagint's mistranslation of Amos 9 verses 11 and 12. But yeah, we could do more of those. I think we've talked about the virgin one as well. But I'll have to talk with Dan, and we will see what we can come up with. This week, or on Thursday, we're going to record an episode interviewing April Ajoy about her book Star Spangled Jesus. So I'm really looking forward to that interview. That should be a lot of fun. Ken, thank you so much for the question. How influential were Celsus and Porphyry? Thanks. They were probably very influential for a short period of time among a portion of Christians, but obviously their influence was counteracted and tapered off pretty quickly once a critical mass of Christians opposed them. But I don't know how to quantify it much more than to say for a short period of time it was probably significant. But we do have folks like Origen writing against Celsus a long time after. So that influence may have stuck around in certain circles for a while. But I'd have to go back and look and see what scholars say about that. And then Shamgar says, the crazy thing about Jezebel for me is that if you think about it, she is the Phoenician version of Esther in a way. Yeah, I mean, there's the primary thing about her is, they attribute all this sin to her, but her biggest sin was just supporting Asherah, which was probably what everybody or the majority of people were doing prior to King Josiah. Oh, and to turn that question on its head, a hero that I think is really a villain would be King Josiah, and we talk about that a little bit in last week's, either the most recent episode of the Data Over Dogma podcast or the previous one. And in my forthcoming book, The Bible Says So, one of the chapters, and I don't remember the number, but what is the topic of the chapter? It's chapter 6. The Bible says God has a wife, which begins on page 78. And I tried to be cute with the section titles. So the Bible says God has a wife. The first section is Adonai's got nards. And you get a digital high five from me if you know what 1980s movie I am riffing on there. But one of the sections is entitled Josiah and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Cult Reform. So I talk a lot about Josiah as more of a villain in my forthcoming book. Oh, sorry about leaving that up there. What time is it? 8:15? Okay, I'm going to have to go in a little bit because I've got to get kids ready for bed, and we're down a bathroom right now. We're remodeling the master bath, which means there are 5 of us who have to use one bathroom right now, at least for like showers and things like that. Okay, Thaddeus61, thank you so much for the question. Do YouTube apologists, and whenever I see YT, my first thought is white. But no, you mean YouTube apologists invite you to their channels, or do they avoid you like the Egyptian plagues? I have never been invited to a YouTube apologist channel. Maybe that's not true. There have probably been an apologist here or there who's said, let's debate this on my channel or something like that, but I generally ignore that stuff. But yeah, for the most part, avoid me like the plague. Although somebody's followers still harass me to this day about why I blocked their apologist hero. Joshua Abramson, thank you so much for the question. Orthodoxy teaches the soul reunites with the body at Christ's return. I think that's probably, yeah, I think that's probably the consensus view within Orthodox Christianity. Friar DeYoung mentions this at 9:20 on Jonathan Pajot's channel, 1 Thessalonians 4:13, 2 Corinthians 5:8. Okay, I think I'm aware of that interview. I have not watched it. I'll have to check that out though. And yeah, I don't know much about that discussion to these days. If he's challenging that or promoting that over and against somebody else who's challenging that. BK201, thank you so much for the question. What's the data say about atonement theory? I was wondering what your views of penal substitutionary atonement / others are. Would love an in-depth vid. I would have to do some prep work to do an in-depth vid. I have taught about some of those things in some previous classes I've taught. But in short, there's no single theory that has much of a case to make for being the grand unifying atonement theory. They're all just takes on the broad idea of atonement. They're all secondary ideas that are trying to flesh out the implications and the mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think any of them wins out over any others. Because we're talking about a long period of time where atonement was conceptualized in a variety of different ways and achieved in a variety of different ways. And we're talking about frameworks, conceptual frameworks that were developed long after those time periods. But yeah, I will, in fact, I'm going to make a note to do a video on atonement theories. All right. Thank you for that recommendation. Travis, thank you so much for the question. Are there any linguistic indicators that the Beatitudes were copied from Aramaic into Greek? There are scholars who suggest some of these fit. Well, there are scholars who will suggest that some of them were probably Aramaic aphorisms that were in circulation at the time. I think you could make a case that some of them could be translations from Aramaic, but on the whole, no, and certainly not the entire Sermon on the Mount. But I would have to look at, I think, the Hermeneia commentary series, the volume on Matthew 1 through 7 is going to have a good discussion on that. Culpepper's recent NTL commentary on Matthew is probably going to discuss that to some degree as well, but probably not in as much detail as the Hermeneia commentary will. But yeah, I would say probably some, but not very strong and not very many. Where's my lid? I don't know where the cap is for that. Nobody Monster Squad, there it is. Listological, you got it. That's what I was riffing on. And I did some I was also trying to be cute in my book with the section titles because I have little, and you probably can't even see it, but I have little asterisks. I have little asterisks at the end of most of the section titles, particularly if I'm riffing on something. And the asterisk goes down to a little note at the bottom that says, with apologies to the creators of the Monster Squad, 1987. So that's like 90 to 95% of my section titles are riffing on song titles. Like here's one: I believe there are angels among us. Down at the bottom, with apologies to Alabama. Nothing compares to you. With apologies to the artist formerly known as Prince, Sinead O'Connor, and Chris Cornell. Don't call me daughter, with apologies to Pearl Jam. And then, I said something. There's another note down here that says, with apologies to Will Smith. And I think I said something about somebody making trouble in the neighborhood. Yeah. It wasn't me, with apologies to Shaggy. And then I what's this chapter's on? The Bible says to sacrifice your firstborn child. So one of the section titles is, even Ezekiel thinks that my mind is gone, which is Weird Al Yankovic. It's a line from Weird Al Yankovic's Amish Paradise. So yeah, I had fun with that. So I'm glad somebody got that one. All right, that should be... Yes, my Dr. Pepper is out, and it looks like we've gotten to the end of the questions, and it is time for me to go get kids ready for bed. So, Dan, what's a good biblical museum to visit? I don't think there are good biblical museums to visit, but if you want to visit museums that have a lot of stuff that is relevant to the Bible, the Ashmolean in Oxford is great. The British Museum, which stole all of its stuff from other nations, is great. The Parthenon Museum, the Acropolis Museum. I think it's called the Acropolis Museum. Is great. Has replicas of a lot of that stuff. The Israel Museum is great. Those all have a lot of wonderful stuff. But biblical museums, Museum of the Bible, I would only, the only reason I would go there is to mock it. And so I probably won't go there. But there are a lot of other museums you can visit in places that have wonderful Bible-related stuff. In fact, my podcast co-host and I are toying with the idea of doing a tour in Europe and England where we go to museums and talk about Bible-related artifacts in the museums. So if anybody thinks that sounds like fun, let me know so I can pass that feedback along, because I know my podcast co-host Dan Beecher would love to do something like that. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time and for your attention. And thank you to everybody who contributed through the Super Chat questions. That means an awful lot to me. I appreciate that you all allow me to do this for a living. I think I'm one of the most fortunate people in the world that I get to do something that I enjoy so much, that I was doing just for fun, and now I get to make a living doing it, and not a lot of people can say that. So it means an awful lot to me, and it's all because of y'all and your support. And so thank you very much. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Hope you have people around you who love you. Hope you have a warm, safe place to spend the night and plenty of food on the table. I will see y'all around, and I hope you all get some wonderful sleep tonight, because I hope that I get some wonderful sleep tonight too, because I need it. So bye, everybody.